Hi everyone. Today I am tuning in to talk about shadow work. Surprise, as per usual. And I wanted to delve into how to get started because that's a question that I get a lot. Like, how do I get started with blah, blah, blah? And I'll tell you first and foremost that shadow work happens to you whether or not you do it. So you actually don't really have to get started or cultivate a practice or do any work in order to engage with shadow work. And when we talk about shadow work, normally what we're talking about is instead of passively allowing the shadows that are within and around us to rule our behavior, we instead engage and start to work with the shadow. And what we're kind of learning as a collective is that, inaction and silence are actually things that create consequences. So doing nothing is also doing something, and saying nothing is also saying something, right? And I think that that's a great lesson for us to learn as a collective as we move into a more collaborative dimension. It is useful for us to know what happens when we ignore or disengage or disassociate with our reality. And, I believe that all of the souls come here in order to, learn lessons and learn how to love and interact with this dimension. So to me, it really only makes sense to be in a state of receptivity and to be in engagement with the world around us. But the unfortunate conflict and obstacle to that is that the engagements can sometimes be very painful, particularly for those of us that have trauma in our history and have had a very painful life. And one of the reasons that, when I talk about disassociation, there's also a clinical definition of disassociation. And often it's in reaction to, things being too difficult to bear. And when we talk about it in the spiritual context, it's very similar. For some of us to engage with difficult aspects of our reality, sometimes we have to turn off other parts of us. And this is why, things like shadow work, appropriation, and spiritual bypassing can be useful to interact with and should be at the forefront of the conversation around magic, which is something that I've noticed since I've started. There's a lot more amplification around these subjects because it is very easy for us to see, to stare into the abyss and become overwhelmed and hurt. And the thing is, like, there's this phenomenon, something that I engaged with briefly that any of us can accidentally slip into, which is we engage with magic and we start to understand the energies in the world, and it becomes painful, it becomes confusing, it becomes difficult. But instead of putting magic down and, deciding that that's not the path for us, some of us continue on in the magical path, ignoring the shadow and ignoring the darkness. And my fear is that in that ignorance, literally by definition, even if it's well-meaning and, just with blinders on, we can start to unintentionally engage with things that we refuse to see the true nature of. And we can fall into relationships and situations that don't serve us because we don't have the language or the perceptual skill to understand that it's not right for us because we skipped a piece. I talk about how, which is something that I learned from a medium who I coach under, the expansion process of ascension. And what I actually engaged with when I was reading the Sophia Code was this inward ascension concept. And it's kind of like a ring or a pupil or a donut, right? We go outward, but we also go inward. And the deeper we go inward, eventually it's kind of like a fourth dimensional funnel. And we start to explore what we're really capable of and how much we can truly see by being embodied inside ourselves. But the thing that it's like gritty, like there's slime, it's like going into the pipes. We can start to go into ourselves and immediately be confronted with the things in ourselves that we have been ignoring for so long. And if we've been making excuses or making up stories about our about our reality that aren't true, which every single one of us does. We all lie to ourselves, and we engage with other people that lie to themselves. And in that, in any coping mechanism, but particularly in that one, we can start to feel feelings of shame and resentment, and we can hate ourselves, honestly. And that's why I think it's so important to engage with shadow work with support, like a therapist or a counselor of some kind, or a friend that's a great listener that has good boundaries, right? Because once we start to ascend, we really do start to interact with aspects of our reality in which we need accountability. And it can be very easy for us to hold other people accountable. I mean, I say easy, but it can be difficult to hold ourselves accountable without punishing ourselves. And when we equate accountability with punishment, because, sometimes we get into this pattern where we say we want to hold people accountable, but really we just want to punish them. If we have that mindset, then we will continue to punish ourselves. And the important thing to remember in this engaging of shadow work and kind of unpacking how we feel about consequences and accountability, we may start to realize that we treat ourselves the way that people hurt us in the past. So, for my perfectionism pattern, it's very easy for me to punish myself in the way that I was punished, which is violently and by causing myself harm, because I think that harm is the consequence for imperfection, right? And so that's my story, but you can apply that template. The other thing that we do is we often project that kind of it's like we tend to hold people closest to us to a very high standard. And the people that get closer and closer to this inner world can start to get closer and closer to our true self. And as they go to that, they come into contact with our toxic patterns. And so when we think about, intimacy or finding our twin flame or, being with our soulmate, some of those blockages in this lifetime really have to do with the unresolved patterns that we continue to play out on the people that are closest to us. So, there's a punishment that I may never give to myself that I would easily, put shame or, project perfectionism onto my partner or to someone who I love, who I'm in an intimate relationship with. And, there's also kind of the psychological frame for reasons that we play out patterns on other people. But when I'm looking at it in a spiritual context, and the way that I look at my practice, which is not psychological or clinical, it's entirely spiritual, is that, my desire is to be so centered in my reality and in myself that when love comes, or as love is loving me, I can react out of compassion instead of out of trauma. And if I haven't worked on that trauma and I continue to ignore and spiritually bypass the ways in which I perpetuate harm, then those, that cosmic divinity that invites very close connection doesn't have a free channel to flow through. So these, the gunk in the pipes, so to speak, can, block our receptivity to love, And I say that, this is something that has happened in my life. I don't want to assume that anyone else is doing this, but that visualization for shadow work really invites me to understand that it's not just about my journey, which it is also 100% about my journey. I'm here to live my life, not to, create material safety or find a partner or live life the way that I'm expected to live in a relationship. Really, it's about who I am, and I'm here to love myself. But we all need support and we all need community. And when we start to do shadow work, what can sometimes happen is we can take out that pain on the people that are closest to us. So I say all that to say, how you can start shadow work. You can journal, you can meditate, you can start to interact with your inner child. And as you do this, it is very useful to have support in your life, and it is really useful for that support to probably not be someone that you're in a very close relationship with, because the potential for causing harm to them is increased by the fact that it's deep spiritual work and they're deeply close to your soul. And then the other thing that I invite when it comes to shadow work is to really remove or reframe, I guess reframe is probably the better word, this concept of purity. Because, purity is a very divine and special concept and archetype. But what it sometimes invites us to do is spiritually bypass the parts of ourself that are kind of dirty and gritty and difficult to deal with. And when we start to delve into darkness, which exists in equal measure with our light inside of all of us, we can project all of these, the word for chaos. I'm sure I've said this before. Conceptually, the word chaos was about looking into the darkness and all of the things that happen in your imagination when you look into the darkness, and your mind becomes chaotic, but this dark hole is very still, right? And so when we come to stillness and when we come to darkness, really what that is peacefulness. It is before the Big Bang. It is the unified energy. Darkness is really unified energy. And what happens is, as we start to engage with darkness, all of those places where peace is not possible, those are the places to look. So, there's something called a scrying stone, which is this black stone that oracles would look into, and they would use that scrying stone to see kind of like a crystal ball, like fortunes, futures, oracular insights. And I really think about that, one, when I look at a cell phone screen, and two, when I'm engaging with my own darkness and I'm doing it for my own benefit, and I am trying to explore what it is in the darkness that creates dissonance, or I cannot find peace, even though the darkness is a place of immense peace. And those things will start to manifest. And it can be scary, which is one of the things that we learn as we start to do this spiritual work, is that fear is not exactly what this realm of material would have us believe. Fear is really an indicator and a compass for understanding what we're capable of and understanding what is for us and what is not for us. And in these situations of exploring our own darkness, it is important to go into it with a compass of light and of understanding that as far as you can go into the light, that is as far as you can go into the darkness. As above, so below, right? And, the darkness of space and the darkness of deep water and the darkness of our pupils, all of these things are messages pointing to the stillness that is possible for us. My first magical dealings, there's huge advice around meditation when it comes to starting magic, and I do advocate for meditation, but I had to start meditating by looking at a candle instead of closing my eyes, because when I closed my eyes, the darkness was unbearable. And now I look back and I have all this Scorpio energy in my chart, and I have these archetypical manifestations of black wings, and I deal with grief and shadow work and sex magic almost exclusively in my practice. And it's ironic looking back at how scared I was of the darkness, but that was an invitation for me. That fear was an invitation to understand why stillness was so uncomfortable for me, and understand my power of imagination and my power of projection. And it taught me to use that power wisely. Instead of allowing it to rule me, it taught me how to rule that power. So yeah, I guess that's kind of how you get started with shadow work. I'm sending lots of love.